Hello, I am Samares. I'm one of the Residence Life coordinators, and I would like to welcome you to this session called Decision Making. Critical Thinking 101.
Hey, I just met you, and this is crazy, but here's my number.
It has several sides. The first, I think for me personally, the most important side is it's the reputation at the residence.
Because you're responsible for the lives of others.
I was going to say, because it affects everyone.
Because if whatever decision you make is going to affect everybody.
Everyone else, yeah.
And, I mean, at the end of the day, you're there for your residents. So if you make a wrong decision, it's going to affect all of them. And these are people who've chosen to live in a residence because they're either not comfortable being by themselves or they're new to the city and therefore don't know anything. And if you make a wrong decision, that could affect their...
If there is some serious situation, some challenging situation, and you make a very wrong decision, you get a very bad image, which is very often difficult to change.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with that. Exactly that.
Sorry.
But at the same time, sometimes, if unfortunately you do have to make a wrong decision, it's not the end of the world. Just learn from it and think about how you could do things differently. Don't beat yourself up.
One of the things is if things get really seriously bad, the first thing to do is get help, and sometimes people forget that, and then it turns bad. So that's
Maybe it's hard to look right at your baby, but you...
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. So just to focus your attention, the learning outcomes of these two presentations on decision making will be to understand and articulate the value of good decision-making skills, to define the 3 key principles of critical thinking, and finally to apply the 8 practices of reflective thought to your own decision-making. Years of cognitive research have shown that the human mind works to create patterns through a process of induction. We'll collect details from here and there, and we'll just put them together to draw our conclusions. As an example, imagine yourself survivors in a shipwreck. You just washed ashore to an unknown land, and you have no idea where you are and what you're supposed to do. All of a sudden, this strange man approaches you and starts speaking to you in Spanish. Wouldn't that immediately let you believe that you're in Spain or in some other country that they speak Spanish? Well, there you go. You just inferred that pretty much everybody in this land speaks Spanish. But what if you don't have all the facts? What if 5 minutes later you meet someone that speaks to you in English? Or in, say, Chinese? Our mind works more comfortably when we are aware of what to expect. When we have fit all of our beliefs in a general pattern that will guide our judgment and decision process every single time. However, sometimes that pattern needs to change. Sometimes we don't have all the facts, and that is something that we should keep in mind. There are 2 ways to change our pattern. There's the hard way. Discover that you have missed something major on the way, something that would force you to revise your principles or ideas in a way that would be embarrassing, place you in an awkward situation, maybe not even allow you to act, but force you to react to a situation. And then there is the easier way. Notice I didn't say easy. Allow for the fact that you don't have all the facts, and approach every situation as an opportunity to revise your core principles. Put them to the test with an open mind and a willing to change them if necessary. That's what we call critical thinking. If you followed my example, you probably reached the conclusion that thinking, when left unchecked, can sometimes be flawed. It could be biased, prejudiced, uninformed, distorted, partial, and can lead to bad decisions. Therefore, the value to critical thinking is that it is our correcting mechanism to our inclination to be ego and sociocentric. The three key principles to decision making are willingness to criticize yourself, reflective thought, and competence. As you will soon come to realize, a recurring theme during RA training will be personal development and practice. While we will be going over all of these three principles, we will focus mainly on the second area, reflective thought. The other two require practice and your own personal investment, and while we can cover them, we cannot make you proficient at them. The first step to applying successful critical thinking is to have willingness to criticize yourself. As surprising as it may sound to some, when it comes to making decisions, you will not always be right. Let me repeat that. You will not always be right. We all have our biases, prejudices, preconceived notions, and then we might be emotionally invested for or against a particular outcome. We might be prejudiced against a factor in the situation. Or, we might just be plainly arrogant. Therefore, we must be able to evaluate our own decision-making processes in order to discover potential biases. So when we make that decision, are we sure we have all the relevant information? Did we ignore some? Did we give credence to unverified information? Rumor mills? Did we make any unfounded inferences or interpretations of the information presented? One of my favorite examples of false assessments is Simon Newcomb's position on the impossibility of a flying machine. The construction of an aerial vehicle which could carry even a single man from place to place at pleasure requires the discovery of some new metal or some new force. He said in 1903, just 5 years before the Wright brothers invented and built the world's first flying machine. According to him, anything heavier than air would be impossible to constitute building materials for a machine that would take off, fly, and land without crashing like dead weight. He even called on the world's engineer to admit that aerial flight is one of the great class of problems which man can never cope, and give up all attempts to grapple with it. Science has an abundance of examples that would force great minds of days past to shove their foot in their mouths had they known about some of our later scientific advances. This does not mean that those people were idiots, just that they were not fully in the position to recognize some of the false assumptions they were making at the time. In this case, that airfoiling is a thing of fiction. Science has long accepted that people are liable to err, that a notion of fallibilism should drive scientific research, and that progress is based on the mistakes of the past. So try to do the same when you're evaluating your own mistakes and thinking process. The only way to avoid those pitfalls is through reflective thought. Before making the decision, stop and think. Deliberate. Consider the evidence that you have and investigate further for the evidence that you might not have. Consider the context in which you have to make a judgment. Consider the relevant criteria for making the judgment well. And also consider applicable methods or techniques for forming that judgment. At this point, you're probably thinking that all this is about limiting your thinking so that you're focused enough to not make any rookie mistakes that will embarrass the department. On the contrary, you could view this presentation as an invitation to think outside the box. Remember that good communication with your line manager, awareness of your priorities as an RA, and the expectations in your role could open up appropriate creative pathways for you to explore when developing event ideas, dealing with situations, or promoting events. The safer you feel in your role and your team, the more creative play you will be willing to engage in, and the more creative your ideas will become. Are you struggling to think how to push the box down the road? Or are you thinking about cutting off the corners and just letting it roll? We are lucky that along with our flawed thinking, sometimes, we have also been granted with certain competence to be able to counterbalance that. For example, use of logic, whether that is formal or informal. Use of intellectual standards. Completeness of evidence gathering, and our ability to be fully self-aware.